Ted Lerner and I spent many hours talking about baseball and the extra inning games and how to make the sport better, how to make it more interesting, how to get more fans to games, how not to overpay players, why Ted Lerner, and he and I would talk about Scott Boras all the time and how Scott Boras would always get him. Yeah, he got me again, that bastard. That is true. You were like prey. You were putty in Scott's hands, Ted. Come on. I warned you. Steven Strasburg. Anyway, so we would talk about the rules of baseball pretty often. There's a rule that yesterday is now a permanent part of your life. My life, any baseball fan's life. It's called the Ghost Runner, and I'm not calling it that. I've told you that. I think on a previous episode I mentioned I'm not calling it Ghost Runner. He's not a ghost. I can see him. And it's not like a guy in a white sheet. It's just a player. And it's the last player who made the last out, or you can do a pinch runner to replace the player who made the last out. But it's pretty much that simple. It's damn Little League rules. You put a guy in second base, and the biggest problem with the rule was solved when the union got its way. What do I mean by that? Do you know that in every play in baseball, it is a net zero financially for owners? Sounds weird, right? But let's think this through. When you're up at the plate and you drive a runner in, you get credit for a run batted in. The player who scores gets credit for a run scored. These are statistics that are used when thinking about value and payroll and salary. However, the pitcher who gave up the run gets an earned run against him, and that goes against his salary. And if it's an error and an unearned run, whoever got the error, that's a demerit against his salary. You can quantify what every play does economically. When you put a runner on second base, there was a fight that the union had, which is, how are we going to deal with this? We've got to give the offensive player an RBI if the runner scores, and we're giving a run scored to that player who got on second base, not by earning it. And the union said, yeah, but what about the pitcher? It's not the pitcher's fault. When a pitcher gives up an inherited run, the earned run goes to the pitcher who put the runner on base. When a pitcher gives up his own run through a home run or gets his own runner on base and then the runner scores, it's an earned run. There's no way we're letting pitchers get charged with an earned run for this extra inning runner. And ownership gave in. So do you know that there is no earned run for the pitcher when the ghost runner scores? And I just called it the ghost runner when I promised you I wouldn't. When the runner on second scores, who got there through walking from the dugout, that's not an earned run for the pitcher, but the offensive player, we agreed as an industry, would get credit for the RBI. So the union then said, sounds good by us. The other reason the union was okay with ending games as quickly as possible is, do you know how many players lose service time because of extra innings games? Extra innings games cause a GM and a president to be on the phone during the course of that game in extra innings to the traveling secretary. Where the hell's our AAA team? We got to get players ready. Pull the player. Get him ready for a 6 a.m. flight because we're going to need to make a player move. We're going to need a starting pitcher because we're going to have to warm up our starting pitcher here shortly, who's tomorrow's starting pitcher, who's going to have to pitch long on short rest because we have no more players to pitch. You're talking to your minor league player development people. You're talking to your player personnel people. Who's next? You're looking at how many options they have left. You're looking at your roster implications. There are players who you designate each year as they're the train between AAA and major leagues. They're on the shuttle. They go back and forth all year long. They come up in a pinch when you need someone. You send them right back down as soon as you can when your main player is back ready to go. It's called the shuttle. There are players, you'd have to go back and look at the stats, Coca, and I don't have it off the top of my head. I bet you there's years where we sent the same player down 5 times. That's called being on the shuttle. Extra inning games cause shuttles. Players don't like being shuttled. It interrupts their family. It interrupts their lodging situation. And oh, by the way, it interrupts their pay, because the people on the shuttle have one rate when they're on a minor league team and one pay rate when on the major league team, because the major league minimum, which is what you get paid, let's say the major league minimum is $162,000. Just for fun, $1,000 a game. If you get called up for a game, you get paid $1,000 for that game. The minor league minimum is about 10 grand, let's say for fun, 10 grand a season, or let's say $1,000 a month. So let's say it's $100 a game. So when you play a minor league game, you get $100. That's a raise of 10 times to get called up for a day. So that's great for the players who get called up, not so great for the players who get sent down, for the sole reason that they had to be used extra days and their arms about to fall off because of extra innings. So the union is not happy with the shuttle. The owners are not happy with the shuttle. How do you avoid the shuttle? Stop the games. Broadcasters, our biggest client, not your corporate sponsors, not your season ticket holders. Your biggest client as a baseball team is your broadcast partner. Now, notwithstanding the fact that the broadcast networks are going bankrupt and that the entire world is changing how you're watching games, the blackout rules are going to be changed. It's all going to be streaming. Major League Baseball is about to take over for all these bankrupt networks. Notwithstanding any of that, your biggest source of revenue is your broadcast partner. And that's nationally the same way too. If you speak to executives at Fox and ESPN and Turner and Apple, guess what? They don't want 5-hour games. No one sits and watches 5-hour games. They just don't. The ideal time, and I've not been able to get any of the lead execs at these stations to say this, but I really want them to. 2 hours and 30 minutes, start to finish. They recognize games will be 240, 245, 306, 320. They don't like it. 2 hours, 30 minutes, bing, bang, boom. Half hour pregame, 2:30, 3-hour window. Thank you. The fact that this became a permanent rule yesterday was always going to happen. The reason why it had been year to year until now is that neither side during collective bargaining negotiations was willing to use it as a trade chip. When you are doing collective bargaining and there's an issue on the table that both sides agree to, you don't bargain it. And you don't acknowledge that you both agreed to it. When it doesn't have to be part of a collective bargaining agreement, you punt it. You say, we'll go year to year. We'll put it as part of the joint competition committee, but there's no way that you're getting a concession because of an extra inning rule. And that's what the ownership said, and that's what the player side said. That's why here we are the next offseason after the first year of the new CBA and this newly formed joint competition committee. Yes, the one with players and an umpire, and it's still run by owners because they've got the majority. No surprise, that rule is there. It doesn't change how you make up your team. It does not change anything. The other new rules in terms of speed and pickoffs and defensive shift, it will change for 29 teams how they make up their team. The 30th team is the Marlins because they're the only team that now has 18 second basemen on their team, and not taking into account the fact that it's a brand new way that roster should be put together. But notwithstanding that, majority of teams are changing the way their rosters are. Lots of implications for the new rules. This rule, no roster implications whatsoever. There's another thing that is not getting as much press that is a big change, and that is something that is very important. I don't want to oversell how much ownership did not like position players pitching. They hated it unanimously. It was always 30-0. What do we do? Because it's embarrassing. There are position players who loved it. They enjoyed it. We had a list of position players who would volunteer. That's part of spring training. Who is going to be available and ready? Let's see you do a bullpen. Let's just see if by chance you won't embarrass yourself, myself, and your arm won't fall off, and you're not one of our highest paid players. And we're going to talk before the season starts in what circumstances we will allow our manager to throw a position player. I've told you the Ichiro story, who so badly wanted to do it, and his manager at the time, Dan Jennings, let him do it in the final game of the season. You know that Albert Pujols wanted to do it, and his manager let him do it. All of those things are true, but in general, when looking at the game, position players pitching means bad. It means there's a blowout. It means that there is a lack of competitiveness, and it was always embarrassing for us to watch SportsCenter or CBS Sports HQ, because every time a position player would pitch, they would show the highlights, and hitters hated facing position players. They all wanted to get pinch hit for. Why? Because it's embarrassing if you don't hit a home run. Can you imagine striking out or grounding out meekly to a position player? You never hear the end of it in the clubhouse. And players, especially this day and age, they don't want to be embarrassed on video. So yesterday, the rule changed. The only way a position player can pitch, if you are winning by 10 runs in the ninth inning, if you're up 10, no problem, put a position player in. Or if you're down 8, then you can pitch a position player whenever you want. So interestingly enough, why is that the rule? When you're up 10 in the ninth inning, the view is that other than playing in Philadelphia or Cincinnati, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to win that game. If you want to go a position player, by all means, but only for 1 inning, 3 outs, that's it. But we only are now going to let you do it down 8. There's another dollar. They're only going to let you do it when you're down 8. Because at 8 runs, when you're down, let's say 9-1, there are people who would say, move on, the game's over. But in this day and age where people are getting down on the knob and there are 3-run home runs all the time, you're not out of a game down 8. So if you're going to put a position player in when you're losing by 8 and you're willing to give up and all of a sudden be down by 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 runs, then have at it. But we're going to follow this year. There will not be a position player who pitches for a trailing team down 8 earlier than the 8th inning even one time, because there's too good a possibility, however small it may be, it exists that you can come back. And, of course, the third time a position player can pitch is in extra innings. And the reason that had to be a rule, and the reason the owners were okay with that as part of a rule and needed that as part of a rule, is there are some baseball people who will say, no matter what, I am not going to pitch my starter tomorrow's game today's extra innings. I don't want him to pitch on early rest. I don't want him to pitch without his normal warm-up. I don't want him to pitch at a time of day that he normally doesn't pitch, and I'm not willing to risk it. So therefore, as a team, you decide before a season starts, before a series starts, you talk about these scenarios and whether or not, if you've got your ace going on Saturday and there's an 18-inning game on Friday, you have made it clear to the manager before that game starts that you are not pitching that Saturday starter. You're not pitching your ace in the 14th inning of a game under any scenario. So if you need to go position player, you need to go position player. There was not going to be a rule that would have allowed and made it so position players wouldn't get to pitch. It's all about injuries.